My name's Colin Marshall. This is the Marketplace of Ideas. This week, Yale law professor and economist Ian Ayres discusses his book, Super Crunchers, Why Thinking by Numbers is the New Way to Be Smart.
People have gotten used to the fact that machines are better at producing horsepower, and people have gotten used to the fact that machines can beat us in chess. They can definitely beat us in information retrieval. I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that machines can beat us in statistical prediction. But there are just an infinity of hypotheses out there, and at least for the foreseeable future, to hypothesize is essentially human. That we are still the people that have to drive the things to be tested.
Every single interview from the Marketplace of Ideas is available on our online archive. Visit us at www.colinmarshallradio.com/marketplace. You can download each show, or you can stream any of them in your browser. Join the International Marketplace of Ideas listening community by adding yourself to our Frapper listener map. The link is right on our front page, colinmarshallradio.com/marketplace. My guest is economist and Yale law professor Ian Ayres, author of Super Crunchers, Why Thinking by Numbers is the New Way to Be Smart. Ian, welcome to the Marketplace of Ideas.
Hi, it's great to be here.
I'll give the definition of what I think super crunching is, and you can tell me how right I am. Super crunching, the process of taking huge amounts, just enormous amounts of quantitative data, analyzing them with today's computing power, and using that information to help make real-world decisions. Is that on the base at all?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Good to hear that I've taken that away from the book. Now, as far as examples of super crunching, I knew your book was going to be good when it opened with a subject near and dear to my own heart, and that's wine. How was super crunching applied to wine?
Well, there's a great number cruncher named Orley Ashenfelter who has a passion for wine, and he went out and collected tons of information about the temperature and rainfall at Bordeaux chateaus, and he was able to make very accurate predictions about the quality of Bordeaux vintages before anyone tasted the vintages. Turns out that temperature at various times during the growing season and rainfall have a big impact on the quality, and in fact he was able to outpredict luminaries such as Robert Parker.
And what did the wine establishment think of this?
They were not amused, and Robert Parker had several negative comments. It's a Neanderthal way of looking at the world, and but interestingly, if you look at Parker's predictions over time, they have come they've gotten better, and he's actually now writing in his blog that he's taking more account of weather and rainfall, so it's had an impact even on him.
So when Ashenfelter put together these numbers, how many variables did he have to take into account before his predictions became accurate?
Well, it's interesting. They started becoming more accurate just really with 3 general controls plus separate controls for each of the chateaus. Some of the chateaus are better placed and have better traditions. So, but really, 2 temperature controls and 1 rainfall control did a lot of the work. And in fact, a convenient truth is that the global warming has made it a great time for Bordeaux. The last decade has had several fantastic vintages because we've had record high heat, and heat in the last month is really good for ripening of the grapes.
So Ashenfelter predicted better vintages, and we've actually been seeing those, or tasting them rather.
Exactly.
And how has the the wine tasting establishment, the critics, the ones who balked at these processes initially, have they come to accept them even grudgingly? Or?
Well, grudgingly, sometimes they won't admit that they're grudging them, but you can do separate crunching to say that that their predictions are coming into conformity with this, and it's kind of interesting that there's parallels between what Ashenfelter has done with wine and what Billy Bean has done with baseball. That there are just both are in the game of trying to figure out how immature product will mature, and can you do it better with numbers? And it's also a little bit interesting. Robert Parker is the analog of the old guard, is the old guard baseball scout. Robert Parker spits out wine, and the old scouts spit out tobacco juice. And in both cases, statistical prediction has proven to be more effective.
And the baseball issue, that is what Michael Lewis covered in his book Moneyball, was it not?
Exactly. And in some ways, Super Crunchers is saying that Moneyball was just the tip of the iceberg, that in field after field, statistical prediction is coming in and producing better decisions, better predictions. In my own field of law, they did a natural experiment of pitting 83 legal experts against a statistical algorithm to predict Supreme Court, the votes of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court for an entire term. And lo and behold, yet again, the statistical algorithm, the statistical prediction, did a much better job than these legal experts.
And in your book, you actually show a flowchart of. Wait, is that accurate to the algorithm?
It is. That is
okay.
The literal flowchart that was used. And in some ways, it was the flowchart for Justice O'Connor. It is incredibly crude, but you see the problem that humans, they know the crude factors, but they just can't bring themselves to put the right weights on it. So every person in the law knows that the Supreme Court hates California. Okay, there's the Ninth Circuit that's out in California, and the Supreme Court is much more likely to overrule a California court decision. We know that, but when it comes to actually making predictions in specific cases, we don't put enough weight on it. We fall in love with side predictions, and the statistical algorithms, even if they're they tend to be much cruder, and they're limited variables, but they do a much better job of putting the right weights on the big variables.
So a human trying to outguess the machine they could know what variables mattered, but they would think that some were more important and some were less important than they actually were?
Yeah, that's right. When we fall in love with we have our sweetheart influences that we think explain what happened with how Justice O'Connor would vote. What's particularly interesting in the Supreme Court study is that the statistical algorithm did particularly well at predicting the swing votes of Justice O'Connor and Justice Kennedy, and keeping things simple and putting big weights on them. There's no emotion to the statistical algorithms, which is part of the advantage.
Now, when did supercrunching cross over? When did it become better than intuition?
Yeah, I would say that it's really been a gradual process over the last 15 years. It's taken off. We, in some ways, at the beginning edge of this is what happened in the with regard to lending. So it used to be that we had loan officers who had a lot of discretion that look you in the eye and that decide whether you were a good risk to lend money to or not. And that was a really bad business model. And so for more than a decade, we have taken away the discretion of lending officers. And lending officers at banks today are really closer to glorified secretaries. They input your information into a computer, and the computer spits out whether you're going to get the loan or not. And let me also just stop here and say, we're living through a subprime lending crisis. sometimes these statistical algorithms can go wrong, but I promise you we're not going to go back to the days where they give the power to individual loan officers. We're going to go to a different statistical algorithm. We won't be going back to humans.
Since you brought up the subprime crunch, I want to ask you, how much of that would you say was a failure to correctly use super crunching?
Yeah, I think we're in the middle of it. We'll learn more about it. One hypothesis is it wasn't a failure of super crunching, but a failure of corporate governance, that there were individuals that were being compensated on volume, and so they did everything just to pump up the amount of loans that went through, since they got a nickel per loan. But it is possible that another hypothesis that is still alive is that the super crunchers misevaluated how risky pools of loans would be. And I think one of the lessons of this crisis is that we shouldn't rely on a single super cruncher analysis. If you have a business, you shouldn't rely on the genius in the corner, but you should have multiple people crunching data, or at least periodically have a statistical auditor come in and try to see if the results that you're betting the firm on are robust to some alternative assumptions, some alternative approaches.
So there's more precautions to be taken in the future, then?
I think so. So another way to say this, we may have gone a little bit overboard in some industries. And so my claim isn't that super crunching is always accurate. When we rely on bad crunching in medicine, people can die. You rely on bad crunching in business, people can lose their shirts. But what my claim is that super crunching, time and time again, and there have now been hundreds of studies that show that it's more accurate than human prediction.
So that's like a meta super crunch.
Exactly right. People actually step back and do a statistical analysis, and it's not that hard to do. You say, who does a better job of predicting parole recidivism? Is it people that use a statistical algorithm, or is it giving parole boards with discretion, or giving psychologists with discretion? And you can sit back and do just what you say, a meta super crunch. Well, we'll take your predictions and we'll take the algorithm's predictions and we'll let it run for 5 years and see who does a better job.
That's one of the things in your book that sold me so much about supercrunching is the meta supercrunching, the fact that supercrunching can evaluate supercrunching. It can tell you the accuracy of its own predictions.
It's so true. And, a place where any listener can just see that is go to faircast.com. And Faircast, it crunches terabytes of data, monstrously large data sets on airline prices. And if you want to take a flight in 2 months, you punch in that flight, and it will give you an arrow about whether the current fare is likely to go up or go down between now and when your flight takes off. So it gives you advice on whether you should buy your ticket now or whether you should wait because it might drop. That's cool, very cool in and of itself. But what I really love is if you look underneath the prediction, it says this prediction is right 80% of the time, or sometimes it'll say 60% of the time. It will give you an indication of its own precision, so that you can tell how much. Sometimes Faircast is just open with you. We don't have much data on this. We're only right 60% of the time. Other times they say this is a prediction. We got tons of confidence. We're right on this type of prediction 90% of the time.
I try to imagine some anointed expert saying, I'm only right 60% of the time.
Yeah, that humans can't bring themselves to put a number on it. And if we actually, a gun to the head to force us to do, we are damnably overconfident. We're when we should only be confident 60%. And by the way, there's some context where you need to make a prediction, but you're not really sure, and that's part of what you should know is the level of precision.
You mentioned that Faircast deals with terabytes of data. What's the threshold of data size where it becomes super crunching? Now, I know you in the book you mentioned terabytes, and they even go higher. I mean, Google is dealing with terms I was previously unfamiliar with.
Yes, with petabytes.
Yes, petabytes.
And it's going and wait, 10 minutes, and we'll have to learn yet another prefix. Well, there's not a hard and fast data size. Definitely, when you're into the terabytes, I'd call that super crunching. But another aspect of super crunching, which actually turns on a different dimension, and it's really the speed of crunching, which can actually happen on smaller data sets. The second great tool that the book focuses on is randomization. And so we've had randomized trials in medicine for decades, but now on the internet, there's another kind of super crunching that can take place, because you can run a randomized experiment where you not only get the results, but implement a policy change based on those results within a matter of hours. In a world where your website is getting millions of hits a day, you can run a randomized experiment about whether you should your landing page should show a little puppy or a kitten. Which one is going to work better to produce people to buy at your site? Well, you run of people that click on any link. Half of them see the puppy, half see the kitten, and in real time, in minutes even, you can start seeing, and it's kind of a thing of beauty when you see the printout on this. You run 5 different pictures, and it looks like a literal horse race. You see the graph stretching off across time, and you start seeing one winner, and you just it's not hard to see what you do then. You change the site toward the picture that's working well. Or should I emphasize in big letters that I have a 10% discount, or that I have a 2-year warranty? Or should I market my beer as tastes great or less filling? Even the title of this book, Super Crunchers, was produced by a randomized experiment that I did on the internet. So I went into this project. I loved the title, The End of Intuition. But I ran a randomized experiment using Google's AdWords, and Super Crunchers had a 63% higher click-through rate when people were doing searches. So that's how I got my title.
That was great. When I read that in the book about your experiment on AdWords, I totally put the book down for a moment. I went on AdWords myself and made an advertisement for the podcast of this show, and made a few of them. And now I'm just addicted to reloading the page and watching which one succeeds. It's so
easy, and you can now yourself know it doesn't take 3 hours to set up one of these experiments.
It's immediate, yeah.
It's immediate, and that's for people like ourselves who are, we're getting enough hits where we can do some fun thing. Imagine if you're a moderate-sized e-retailer, and you can just start doing tons of stuff. But the revolution is still only in process. Part of this is we need to take away some of the control of the guy in the room that has the coolest glasses. The people with the graphic designers think they know best, and we'll be, one sign that the revolution will have been making great success is when the New York Times starts doing some randomized testing on their front page, on their homepage of NewYorkTimes.com. So my claim is graphic designers aren't smarter than fifth graders. In that if you gave me 10 fifth graders and I asked each of them to come up with 5 changes to the New York Times homepage, I could then run the current homepage against 50 alternatives. And I bet one of those 50 would beat out the current homepage. And all you have to do then is change to that one. I mean, it's you don't have to. The fact, if you have a business out there and you're not running a randomized experiment you're on the web or even off the web, you're really missing out.
And I want to say now that you chose the title of your book to be Super Crunchers, that I'm very glad you didn't use the end of intuition, because I've read so many books that are like the end of blank and the death of blank, and yours is better than those, I must say.
Oh, and it's so much it's the end of my own intuition, but really the message of this book isn't that our intuition is dead, but we just really have to intuitive people will still be needed. We come up with the hunches, but you just have to be willing to put your intuitions to the test. That's really the big lesson here.
Now, I wanted to ask about an example of super crunching that affects most of us, although some of us try to avoid it. I'll occasionally talk to someone who claims they don't use credit cards and won't buy on the internet, because then companies can know what they buy and they'll use that to create advertisements targeted toward them. And I think to myself, well, I want that. I want ads targeted toward me. What kind of super crunching is that? Who does that?
Lots of people are doing it. I too prefer to have advertisements that are tailored to me, and this is why Google is worth so many billions of dollars, is that they try to give you ads that when you put in a search term that you actually care about, and that now Google and Yahoo and Facebook and MySpace, they're going to try to tailor ads to the content of your Facebook page, if you are willing to allow this, to the content of your email. Google, besides its AdWords, its AdSense, allows anybody that has a web page to throw up ads that are automatically generated and automatically tied to the content of the web page. So that if you have a blog on fly fishing, you just sign up at Google AdWords. You don't even tell Google AdWords what your blog is about. It automatically scans your blog page and will throw up the right ads about lures and if for some reason on your blog, even though it starts off to be about fly fishing, if you start posting a bunch about your impending divorce, there probably will be some divorce lawyer ads that pop up on the right-hand side. And Google has incentives to try to find out the ads that work. Now, it's a very, very small number of people, but people should have the option to opt out, to turn off the cookies. There is a movement to try to have a do not track list that's just been proposed to the Federal Trade Commission, and so that's so there are the privacy huggers, the data huggers are out there, but I have to say this is not an area where I think many Americans are going to opt for more privacy.
Is Google the absolute vanguard of super crunching?
Well, yes, in many dimensions, but they're not alone. We've just had in the last few months there have been $3 billion takeovers of business intelligence software. Just 2 days ago, IBM purchased Cognos for multiple $1 billion. Last month, Business Objects was purchased for $4 billion. And these you might not have heard of Cognos before, but there is real money in going out and doing crunching historical data sets to find out the hidden causes of the hidden levers of consumer behavior.
That's very cool. That's the judging consumer behavior, figuring it out. Is that sort of what you depict Walmart doing in their book?
Yes. They're one of the standard stories that people that is a great at least image of what's happened at Walmart is that they can when they hear that a hurricane is going to hit, that they have found from the past that people like Pop-Tarts after a hurricane. You don't need to refrigerate them, and so Walmart will start rushing Pop-Tarts to its stores in a in a place where a hurricane is going to hit before it hits. That they so it's not just the flashlights and the gear that you might have thought, this is what people like. They look to see what sells out after a hurricane, and they try to up their inventory in those things beforehand.
So if you see Pop-Tarts suddenly proliferating at your local Walmart, batten down the hatches.
Exactly right.
Now, what can super crunching do for government? What has it done?
Sure, it can help target resources. So it turns out that a great example of this is in unemployment insurance. So government has done a bunch of randomized tests to try to figure out what policies help people get off unemployment. You've been laid off, and how do you do it? Well, it turns out they've done tests of what if you bribe the unemployed person to go get a job, or what if you tell the unemployed person, if you get a job, here's a voucher and we'll bribe the employer, or they'll subsidize job training. Well, it turns out that all of those experiments are beaten out by not job training, but by job search search training. So that if you instead help people write a resume and learn how to better look through want ads, you get a much bigger bang for the buck. And in fact, you do even better if you use some super crunching prediction. So you get a pool of people that have been laid off. You make predictions about which of them will have a hard time finding a job. So you can actually then target your resources to those people that you predict that are going to be unemployed for a long time, and you can really reduce their unemployment. So some people you don't have to give the job search assistance to, because you predict that they're going to have a very short unemployment spell anyway. So this is a way that government is using both experimentation, literally randomized testing, and a kind of historical target crunching based on historical data to target resources to the people who need them the most.
Now, one would think that a politician might be less than willing to use super crunching in their policies because it would make them look less like a savior figure.
Well, that's right, but randomized testing. This is something that actually, since the book, I've just been thinking more about it. One of the puzzles is why government has actually taken the lead in doing randomized testing more than business. And that's kind of strange. Usually, business is ahead of government in number crunching or in using any technology. But one of the things that's kind of interesting, I think you can sometimes get bipartisan support for doing a test when you can't get it for just doing a policy. Well, and actually both sides. Let's say you're a liberal and I'm a conservative, and you think that you want to do a market intervention, and you want to do a test on some market intervention. And actually both of us might say, okay, let's do a randomized test on it. You think because of your ideology that you're going to win the test. I think because of my ideology you're going to lose it. So we both think we can make political capital off of the results of the test because we both think our side is going to win it. And what we have seen in time and time again is a kind of bipartisan support for a randomized test that leads to very clear results about whether the policy works or not. If both sides, and so you can actually, the ideological differences can sometimes bring people together to run a test.
This is one area, maybe the only one, where strong ideological conviction actually helps.
That's exactly right. And then after the fact, the results of a randomized test are so transparent. Half the people got it, half the people didn't. Down in Mexico, they did a randomized experiment over contingent food and money subsidies. So they took 500 villages, and half of them they did nothing to, and half at random they chose, and they said, look, poor mothers in these villages, if your kids go to school 85% of the time, we'll give you some money. If your family regularly goes to a medical clinic, we'll give you food subsidies. And they just watched what happened to the kids in these two different sets of villages. And the kids that got the food and money subsidies did humongously better. They went to school, and they were much healthier. Kind of the kicker is that in the course of 2.5 years, the kids in the subsidized villages were a centimeter taller, which public health people will tell you that's just huge because healthy kids grow faster. And this subsidy program is called Progressa. It was such a powerful result that it's expanded nationally. It's helping 2 million families in Mexico, and 30 other countries have now adopted Progressa-like programs, including Mayor Bloomberg's trying to bring it to New York now. So this, when you talk about this new kind of impact that super crunching is having, Progressa's my candidate for the most important randomized policy experiment that's ever been run.
And you can tell it was a good policy because the government that took over after the PRI was out kept it on, but of course under a different name.
Exactly right.
Was that purely, they just admitted we have to change the name because it'll make it sound like we did it? Or?
Yeah, admitted at some level. That's, and maybe we should take, that's right, and every new podcast has to have a new name, and there you go.
For those just tuning in, my guest is Ian Ayres, Yale law professor and economist, author of Super Crunchers, Why Thinking by Numbers is the New Way to Be Smart. One other area where this can be important is what you call evidence-based medicine. Now, I read that phrase like I hear when people describe themselves as part of the reality-based community. I think, well, what's the other alternative, and what is non-evidence-based medicine based on?
Yeah, it was exactly the question that I came to this. The evidence-based medicine is where you do treatment decisions based on statistical analysis, and non-evidence-based medicine is where you base treatment choices not on statistical analysis, but on your intuitions and your experience. We've always done it this way. The person who taught me did it this way. And it is just shocking that up to 1985, most treatment decisions were not statistically driven. There weren't studies supporting. So they weren't based on evidence. They were based on intuitions and let's call it non-statistical evidence. People said, well, we've always done it this way, and it seems to have worked for us. But, of course, how do you know it really worked if you didn't try other things? That's part of the problem. And this revolution that's taken place since 1985 is a couple-fold. One is now they have grades on every treatment choice basically throughout medicine. So you can say people say this is a potential treatment choice, and it has this level of evidence behind it. It has multiple randomized studies supporting it. Sometimes it doesn't have randomized study. It might only have one, or and so you'll have literal grades from A down to F that you can quickly judge how much you need to rely on this advice from a guideline, for example. And the second revolution that is that for the first time, doctors are starting to do patient-specific research. As a lawyer, this is kind of a shock when it suddenly hit me what was going on. If a client comes to you with a problem, the first thing you do is you go pick up a book and you start looking at what the law is for that specific client. Well, if you go back before 1990, go back before the advent of the internet, and just ask yourself, where was your doctor's library? And, doctors didn't have libraries because they didn't need them. They didn't do research for their patients.
They had their enormous brains.
And indeed, and if their brain wasn't enough, they would send you to a specialist who also wouldn't do research for you. They would do generalized reading in the field. But nowadays, every doctor has a library at their elbow, and it's the internet. You can go do research, and it's starting to happen for the first time. And our enormous brains are nice, but it's when there are thousands of diseases and tens of thousands of potential treatments out there, it's good to try to remember what to help on diagnosis and to help then on trying to figure out what is the best treatment for this potential disease.
Now, tell me if you found this, but most of the time, the vast majority of the time, in fact, when I talk to a healthcare insider, the number one complaint is that healthcare operates with Stone Age, or I'll give them Iron Age era information technology.
I think that's fair. But the fact that we've made it into the Iron Age out of the Stone Age is progress. And I'm optimistic. So, for example, we're really right now. It's happening this year. It'll be with us really in place within 2 or 3 years. It's the digitalization of hospital records. And from a statistical perspective, most of our relatives have died in vain. That their medical experience has just been thrown away. It has not benefited humanity. But now, right now, this year and the next year and the year after, for the first time, we're going to start keeping digital records that we can aggregate and suddenly make use of, so that when you go into the hospital with these 3 symptoms and these 2 test results, the physicians can say for the first time, "Oh my God, who are the other people that have come to this hospital?" Or, matter of fact, to any hospital in this region or in the United States with those symptoms and test results, and what happened to them. You can start doing some real super crunching on how were they diagnosed, how were they treated, what were the outcomes. The same logic that applies to how much business can profit from trolling through its historical records, all the more is going to help us save lives in medicine.
Now, is it going to be possible to go back and take the old medical data and put that into the system, like of all the old dead relatives you mentioned? Are their experiences going to be digitized and put into the huge database, or are we starting over?
That's an excellent question, and to a limited extent, I think there is a potential yes. But it's here's the problem. While you can digitize books, and you have your the problem with digitizing past medical records is that the doctors were not uniform in how they kept them. The image of doctors, dictating their notes, they didn't do them in systematic ways. And one of the fights that's going to take place is taking place right now as we move to digitization. Is can you force physicians into standardized reporting so that you can have uniform fields that are comparative across this? Now, even without that, fancy super crunching can take the unorganized notes. Once we get them into digital, you can do an analysis of them and try to organize them into standardized forms. There's going to be some error rate, and then there's going to be just a lot of missing data, because if the physicians if nowhere in their dictation do they mention the age of the patient, or if they never mention whether the patient smokes or not, then you just can't make up that fact out of you can't create for missing data. So I think it's a bit of an open question of whether it will be pass the cost-benefit test to do digitalization of past records.
You mentioned their dictation of notes. I think that's still better than if they'd actually handwritten the notes, because, we all know doctors' handwriting.
There you go. Even worse. So, and so indeed, then you do optical character recognition on their chicken scrawl.
We will never have that technology.
Well, there you go. So that's so there may be real, there may be some, so we may, and this is the sad part, that a lot of our relatives it may irretrievably have thrown their lives away. That we couldn't stop them from dying, but we could at least have kept data. And again, there at this point, the data huggers can say, "Oh, but this is horrible, and we're going to lose. People will know everything about my medical records." I'm optimistic here, and we do have some experience. Congress did, with regard to cancer, has mandated that hospitals keep standardized records of everybody who is diagnosed with cancer, and there have not been huge data leaks. There have not been. You can get aggregate data that still preserves individual privacy. So you're one of 10,000 lung cancer patients, but no one peeks inside, and at least we haven't seen a lot of newspaper articles on that kind of identity invasion.
I think I would trade away a whole lot of my personal data just for a 1% chance less of dying due to hospital error.
You and I are exactly right, and indeed, and if you are a little bit of an altruist, even if it's not going to help you, let's say it's a 1% chance less that the next person will die, I'd do it.
It's still good.
Yeah.
Now, you have another section in Super Crunchers about the application of super crunching to the film industry. And my first question, and the most important one, I think, is how do you pronounce this firm's name?
Epigojics.
Epigojics. Very close to what I thought. Now, what do they do? How do they super crunch films?
They've created a historical database that they have coded film scripts on over 200 variables, and they use a prediction algorithm called a neural network, which at the end of the day comes up with a statistical prediction that relates these 200 script and actually and other variables such as what the promotion budget is and who the stars are and who the director is, and it relates that to how many tickets it sells, what's its box office gross, and they have been able to use this system to again make accurate predictions about how many tickets movies will sell, and it's again a little bit like Orley Ashenfelter's line predictions about Billy Bean's baseball scout predictions. This is yet another place where you're trying to figure out the ultimate success of an immature product, an immature wine, an immature baseball player. Here you have a script that before they've ever shot a single scene from the movie, epigojics will come in and make predictions about how many tickets it will sell. And something that even drives people crazier, they have the temerity to come in. Oh, by the way, if you added a buddy character for your protagonist, it'll sell 7 million more tickets. Or if you move the location to Chicago, you could add 4.5 million. And so they are willing to intervene in the artistic process. I was telling this to one person. He said, "Oh, this is the death of art." But I'm.
There's a book title, by the way.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. That should be a follow-up. But I'm a fan of epigojics. Producers have been interfering with scripts and artistic vision for a long time. That train's left the station a long time ago. But if you're going to intervene, you should at least do it on good information. It's what's really galling is when you intervene for a commercial reason, and it ends up hurting the commercial success of a film.
So the question you ask is, even if super crunching interferes in the production of films, could it be worse than some suit who dictates from on high what he thinks the public wants?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is no. I can't, or at least we deserve to run that test and do some meta crunching.
Yeah, meta crunch that.
That's and I even think that it might lead not to a flattening of every movie being exactly the same and every movie being made in Chicago. I think it again, the suits have been giving us genre films and Rocky 8. Let's see. You might actually have more diversity if you let the computers take a little bit more control.
Because really, the only way super crunching would make all films the same is if every individual going to films literally wanted the same thing, right?
Yeah, and I should emphasize that this process that they use has over 200 variables that are massively interacted with each other, and so you could. It's unlikely, just from what I know about the internals of the meat grinder, that it would produce that all films being the same. That there are going to be a lot of different ways to a lot of different types of scripts will generate movie sales.
I don't know if you have the information on this, but how likely is the average moviegoer to have seen an epigojics film?
Well, it's unclear that and by the way, Malcolm Gladwell has just a great article on this in the New Yorker last year. The studios are using it, but are using it on the QT, and so it's hard to know exactly how much of this is going on there. We know that there have been more than 20 films that have been vetted by epigojics. How many of them that it's unknown how many of the studios have changed the films based on epigojics advice. One of the principal people at epigojics himself, though, is putting his money where the mouth is, and he's trying. He has bought a script rights. He's bought movie rights on a movie that has been made and failed, and his analysis of it is that he can remake it, change the plot slightly, and make it into a hit.
Resurrecting a flop.
Exactly
with
right.
Super crunching.
And so it's putting so epigojics itself is going to maybe become a player or run the test on themselves.
Since go ahead.
I've been trying to actually get publishers. If you can do this to predict movie sales, why not do it to predict book sales for novels? And you could code those and possibly do that. So I've been trying to, and you could run again a very simple test. Is at the point that where a publishing house like Random House purchased the novel, they have their prediction of what the novel is going to sell. I could come in and with my own prediction, and we could wait a year and see, do this on 20 different novels, and wait a year and see who has the better predictions. It would be again like the Supreme Court test, but not predicting votes, but predicting book sales.
Now, since you mentioned Malcolm Gladwell, I want to bring up an issue you've probably heard a million times already, but Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, all about the awesome power of intuition. Your book, not quite so much. How do your theses compare?
Well, I actually think that Gladwell's Blink book, which I highly recommend, is nuanced, and he sees both the power of intuition in some contexts, but he also openly discusses that there are situations where our intuitions may lead us astray, that we may have biases that come out. Indeed, he has a few pages in the book that talks about some crunching that I did on race and gender discrimination in new car sales, where salespeople systematically charge higher prices to women and African Americans. And this might be a place where something takes over, a blink moment. And so he is open to the possibility that there are contexts where taking away discretion is actually improves decision making. And by the way, and on my side, I think there are going to be a lot of decisions in our lives where we can't profit from super crunching. There are going to be some decisions that are so unique, one-off, that you don't have the ability to go back to historical comparisons, or you don't have the ability to run a randomized experiment. And those are, those are going to be places where you're going to have to fall back on something else. So I want to leave open a space for both good blink, but I think really he and I would agree that there are times where you want to take away discretion and have, and really a theme of my book is there are a lot of places where line employees are losing discretion. They're losing their blink opportunities and being forced to follow scripted approaches.
Toward the end of your book, you do bring up the issue of the new dynamic between intuition and statistical thinking and statistical processing. How will those two work together in the future?
Well, I think that the best decision makers will toggle back and forth and back again between their intuitions and numbers. And this is not just starting with a hunch and going out and testing it, but I also want to emphasize that people are going to, sometimes you'll be looking at numbers. The best decision makers will sometimes look at numbers and see some anomaly that will cause them to go back to the drawing board and say, what in the world could be causing that? And that will drive them to another hypothesis, which can often then lead to another test. So the best decision makers will be more statistics savvy and will be, but not just pure statistics gearheads. They'll be able to live in both worlds, to go and move back and forth between them.
So we need human intuition still to interpret super crunching and to, in a sense, drive super crunching to get it going. Exactly
right. These come up with the hypotheses that you're going to test. That's really, while we're not good at predicting, that we're, part of this is, people have gotten used to the fact that machines are better at producing horsepower, and people have gotten used to the fact that machines can beat us in chess. They can definitely beat us in information retrieval. I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that machines can beat us in statistical prediction. But there are just an infinity of hypotheses out there, and at least for the foreseeable future, humans, to hypothesize is essentially human, that we are still the people that have to drive the things to be tested. How important is good statistical thinking for the general public? I think it's dramatically important, and that no one should leave college without a course in statistics. I'm a firm believer in this, but I even think it should go down toward high school, and that 2% of college graduates make use of calculus in their lives. 2%? Yeah. Well, and by the way, I'm making this up, but I'm trying to be generous.
Wow.
But I think 100% of high school graduates could actually benefit from being better consumers of statistics. And to be very specific, if you don't have an intuitive sense of what a standard deviation is, then you're not a good consumer of statistics. If you don't know that there's a 95% chance that a random variable will be within 2 standard deviations of its mean, you're you're not yet on the right side of the super crunching divide. And I taught my kids when they were 8 and 10, to start thinking statistically, and I care really deeply about this, and we can, and so I think high school math programs should shift more with having statistics instead of calculus being the capstone course for high school. Much, much more important than calculus.
Do you often now find your kids doing sort of mini crunches with standard deviations in their minds often?
I do, and there's an interesting, one of my favorite stories is I was walking up a local hill here called Sleeping Giant, and I asked my daughter when she was 9, I said, Anna, how many times in your life have you climbed this Sleeping Giant? She said 6 times, and I said, and Anna, what's the standard deviation of that estimate? And she said, 2 times, Daddy. And then the coolest thing is she paused, and I hadn't asked her any other question. She paused as we were walking, and she said, Dad, I want to revise my mean. And in her mind, she realized that something about saying saying an estimate of 6 and a standard deviation of 2 didn't sound right. It basically saying that her 95% range was between 2 and 10 times, and she knew she'd walked it more than 2 times. And focusing on the standard deviation actually led her to a better estimate. She raised her estimate from 6 to 8, which is a much better estimate of how many times she had walked that Sleeping Giant.
So with enough practice, statistics can be a whole second language, a second mindset, or even a first mindset for people.
Yeah, and again, it's really the kind of thing that we're lacking in the United States is not really rocket science. We're lacking a vocabulary for dispersion. We know how to estimate, at least to talk about averages, but to talk about how variable some process is, we just don't have a way of talking to each other about that. And if we could start just having an intuitive understanding about standard deviation so that people could actually say, like my 9-year-old daughter, that the standard deviation of my estimate is 2, you could actually say a lot more. And this comes up in lots of different contexts. How long is it going to take me to drive from New Haven to New York? Well, I care not just about the average, but I care sometime about how variable that is. And we just don't have a way to talk to each other about that, and standard deviations is a great start.
Was one of the goals of your book to spread that understanding?
Yes, but I have to say that it is the book, and that's what the last chapter, I'm trying to seduce readers toward that, to say, for the first 8 chapters, to say, look, something really important is coming on that is going to impact you as a worker, as consumers, in ways it's probably impacting you in ways you don't realize, and most of it is good. Some of it you may want to have some concerns, and it's going to be coming more and more. So this is, and so you want to be up to speed on it. And the last chapter starts giving you tools to understand this very basic concept of standard deviation. Before we end, too, I should say there's another way. People that are interested in starting to do super crunching themselves, I've collected and created, I think now more than 40 prediction tools that are up on the web. If you go to supercrunchers.com, you yourself can start doing statistical predictions on stuff you care about. So you can, if you put in a few variables about your kid, it'll make a prediction of how tall your kid will end up being. Or if you're pregnant, it will make a more accurate prediction about when your due date is, or how long you'll live, or what sports teams might, the chance that a sports team will win, or an election. There are all kinds of tools, including how Justice Kennedy will vote on the next case. So, there are lots of different, you can get your glove and get in the game yourself of statistical prediction.
So listening audience, you heard the man. Experience supercrunching for yourself at supercrunchers.com. Once again, the book is Super Crunchers. Professor Ayres, thank you so much for joining us.
A real pleasure. Thanks.
Our music is composed by Ben Althouse. He also goes under the names Ice Ben and DJ Concept. Check out his website, www.benalthouse, that's BENALTHOUSE.com. Find our complete show archive, our Frapper map, and more on our website, www.colinmarshallradio.com/marketplace.